Hello, Joy Olson, Blockbuster Fundraising. Well, I have talked often about Jeff Brooks, who he's written a couple of my very favorite fundraising books. And just last week, we explored his books about how to turn your words into money. And this part of the book that we're going to talk about now today is how to write your stories, how to turn your storytelling words into money. And I think you're going to find it extremely interesting. Jeff says that you can understand the risk of a problem in your head, but you've got to feel it in your gut. And when you feel it in your gut, that's when you're charged with the energy to respond. That's the power of story. It can flip the switch in our heads from, it's not quite there, to it's unavoidably real. We know the facts. We can calculate the statistics, but we know them with our heads, not our hearts. And that's how your cause is for most donors. They've been exposed to the facts, probably for decades. You can shovel more and more facts about your issue or your problems at them, but that won't change a thing in their brains until you lift the curtain by telling a story. Until then, they won't give. Jeff Brooks has studied Aristotle's Poetics, and he says it's a small book, but an important book, because it defines the ingredients of powerful stage drama. And Jeff reinterprets Poetics because he feels that fundraising stories are just like other stories. And a fundraising story is made of these main ingredients. Ready? Number one, first ingredient, a protagonist. A good fundraising story is about one person. It's not a village, a neighborhood, or a drought-stricken region, nor the arts or democracy. It must be one person that we can look in the eye and feel empathy toward. And maybe that person can be an animal. An animal works for me. The human brain can only take in one person at a time. And Jeff says that this one person rule is nearly ironclad. If you stretch your one person to, say you have a wonderful story about a young girl in need and you make her baby brother the co-star, you can weaken the story and the response. So make sure that the protagonist stays center stage. Make the other people less visible. If they're not critical or crucial to the story, hey, leave them out. Don't describe how secondary people look. And don't use secondary people's names unless it's necessary. You want to do this to avoid confusion. You do all this to sharpen the focus on the protagonist. All right. Secondly, you've got to have a problem. Aristotle called it the mythos. Until we see the protagonist struggling with a problem, you still don't have a story. So just as it's important to focus on one protagonist, you must focus on one concrete problem. Not something global like injustice or poverty. Not even a narrower issue like gender or equality. Jeff says those are abstractions. That means you show the immediate problem as it plays out in the life of your protagonist. The other crucial thing about the problem and your story is you must show it to be solvable. Solvable by the donor. Think about that and how it applies to your cause. Have you been presenting your donors with problems they can solve? Your donors likely feel powerless to put an end to poverty or injustice, but they can easily imagine reaching out to one person and making a difference. Details. Now for details of your story. And Aristotle called it a spectacle or an opus. Details make your stories real. They make it believable and memorable. When you reveal details that engage the senses, you draw your donor deeper into the story. They can feel the pain as if it's their own. These details can bring life to a story that might otherwise not be at all memorable. Some details might be like the unbearable heat and sweat trickling down her back. The flies cluster on every bit of her exposed skin while she crouches next to the water hole. The weight of the water she carries, and it's deforming her back as she bends into this permanent situation. Or the clean uniform on the children that she sees and hears as she passes the school. When you read details like this and descriptions like this, you feel like you're right there. You really bring the story to life. And now you need commentary. In the dramas of Aristotle's days, there was always a chorus that would interrupt to sing or chant about what was going on. Their job was to make sure that the audience didn't miss or misinterpret the point. So, as the storyteller engaged in fundraising, you are the chorus. It's up to you to help your donor interpret the story. And Jeff Brooks tells us that there are two main ways to do this. The first way is background information. Give them background information that gives context. In the example that we talked about before in the girl's story, she can't go to school like your kids do. The fees for uniform, books, and supplies, they're beyond the reach of her family. Chances are your reader doesn't know this. So when you tell your donor this, the story becomes stronger with that background information. Secondly, you need emotional content. Tell the reader how to feel. And you can do this with simple asides like, how would you feel if you were her? Or, oh, my heart breaks for her. Next, you've got to have the right ending. And Jeff Brooks points out that Aristotle didn't include this one on his list. But your fundraising story should not end with the problem solved. It should end with an unresolved cliffhanger, waiting for the donor to take action. Many fundraising stories, otherwise well told, fall down on this point. If you show the problem has been taken care of, you resolve the tension you worked so hard to build. You're saying clearly, never mind. This is the challenge, because by the time you discover the story, the hard part of it is usually past. Most likely, you learned about Sumita because she's in school now, where someone intervened and interviewed her. Of course, there's another girl like her who's still waiting. But We haven't met her yet. So, here's how fundraisers often try to solve this problem. They write, Sumita finally got into school. She's doing well, excelling in math, but thousands more like her still need help. Well, logically that solves the problem, but emotionally it does not. The story of Sumita getting her problem solved is still her story. It's more vivid than your weak disclaimer about faceless thousands that you can now help. In essence, you shouted everything is fine, then vaguely mumbled that maybe it isn't. So you don't want to do that. You want to not finish your story. You want to leave it up to the donor, because that's what you want the donor to do. So Jeff says you can't slap any untrue endings on the story, claiming that Sumita is still waiting for help if she isn't. Instead, you have to do something very hard to do. Not till the end of the story, just leave it untold. Can you do that? Jeff says it's going to make you uncomfortable, but it's smart fundraising. And by leaving the ending off, you're leading the reader to choose the happy ending they want. What do you think about that? So listen to how Jeff would write Sumita's story in a fundraising message. Quote, Sumita sat in the shade of a big tree just outside the school. She could hear the children inside chanting their arithmetic lesson. She couldn't understand what their words meant. A tear ran down her cheek. I'll never be able to go to school, she thought, staring at her heavy water can. Your gift will send children to school. You can wipe away those tears and replace them with happy dreams about the better life they're building because of you. Isn't that wonderful? You didn't tell the ending. You let the hero, the donor, step in and make that happy ending. Jeff Brooks says that Aristotle also believed in a deeper purpose for telling stories, and Aristotle called it catharsis, a sort of psychological cleansing that leads to transformation. He said that the intense emotion and situations in a well-told story could change the listeners' lives. As fundraisers, we're not quite that ambitious, but we know charitable giving can transform donors' lives, which is why our stories matter so much, so very much. In his book, Jeff gives 5 ways to use stories for impact, but simple is good. Cover everything that you need to cover and then tell the story. Here's an outline of what I've just said. Number 1, why I am writing to you. 2, why the situation is urgent. And then thirdly, an ask. 4th, why you'll be glad you gave. 5th, your story. And 6th, ask again. He says that telling the story after you've covered everything else, or nearly everything, should be the default way to handle stories in fundraising. Jeff points out that you need a hero of your story, and the very best hero possible is your donor. And he gives us an example of a donor as the hero story. It goes like this, quote, "I wish you could have met Robina. You would have understood her completely, even though her life was very different from yours. I say was because Robina died a month after I met her. Unlike so many people in her village in Uganda, she died of AIDS. Only elderly people and children were left alive after the disease swept through. While Robina sat in her dirt floor dying, she had one terrible worry. What about the children? Who will care for my 5 little ones? Her elderly mother, of course, would do her best. But how could she care for so many? That's why I'm coming to you." End of quote. Jeff points out that this story is, of course, about a beneficiary, Robina. But see how the point of view has shifted? The reader has become a part of the story. The narrative is happening in the donor's world. Important here, address the donor directly and put the story in her context. The details that you choose to show, the things that you tell your friend or your mother, not necessarily what you would include for dramatic value. The writing is colloquial, it's conversational, because there's a lot of you in it, and without the donor, the story is empty. It directly answers the question, why are you telling me this? And it easily and gracefully integrates with a call to action. It's all about action, not what the organization is doing. Not what the organization is doing, but what the donor can do. We've got to remember that. Jeff Brooks says that the secret behind all fundraising storytelling is this: don't brag about the awesomeness of your organization, and don't demonstrate your superb skills as a writer. Instead, connect with the donor and invite the donor into a corner of the world that they can change. Okay, so what if you don't have a bunch of great stories? What can you do about that? Well, Jeff Brooks suggests word pictures. This is really important. A word picture is almost a story. It's not a specific account of a specific person, and it lacks the documentation of a journalistic account or the richness of a narrative. It's just a snapshot, a few sentences that reveal a situation and capture its human and emotional core. Now, the characteristics of a word picture, that they're different from the story, and those differences are this: the way you set up a word picture is different. You must make it clear that this isn't a specific account. You use introductory phrases like imagine, picture this, if you were there, you'd see. There's no plot. It's a photo, not a movie. You're just capturing the situation. And a word picture is told in present tense. That helps to signal the ongoing nature of the scene. Past tense signals that you're describing a specific event that actually happened in the past. It's short, seldom more than 5 or 6 sentences. It's missing names. When you give someone a name, you signal that this is a specific person. Jeff says that the tricky and complicated thing about word pictures is that it's easy to cross the line into making stuff up. None of us, we absolutely cannot do that. It's unethical, and it breaks the relational contract that we want to build with donors. but a well-built word picture can give your readers an emotional connection nearly as powerful as a real story. And it has all the active ingredients. It has a person, a problem, and emotion. And that gets you most of the way to where you need to go. Granted, a good story is better than a word picture any day. It's more powerful, more persuasive, more relevant. But a vivid word picture is better than a confusing or off-the-point story, and a word picture is far better than no story at all. So what is our job as fundraising writers? Jeff says that we start with a complex, confusing, sometimes even discouraging realities, and then we transform them into living opportunities for donors. We build bridges that connect people to causes they care about. Bridges that allow understanding, love, and money to cross the gap. Jeff says to remember these two facts about human motivation when you are writing fundraising messages. Facts. Facts and figures do not move people to give. We give when we respond emotionally to a situation. Facts suppress emotions. Secondly, people don't rise to action because a problem is big. They take action because they see a problem as solvable. Telling them that the problem is big in effect tells them it's not solvable. Jeff says that he's learned that every fundraising ask must have a puppy. Not necessarily an actual puppy dog, but someone whose story tells the story in a way that touches the heart, like a puppy does. The way a puppy does, and if you don't have a puppy in your story, then you aren't really fundraising. You're just spreading words around, hoping that they randomly catch people's attention. And Jeff points out that there are 4 smart assumptions about your donors too when you're writing your stories. Number 1, donors are older than you. So he says to deal with older people in fundraising, you should not try to be clever, you should avoid hype and be straightforward. Secondly, donors are more emotional than you. Neuroscience has shown that with age comes a notable shift in brain activity to the right lobe. And that's the qualitative, holistic, emotional side. And this causes older people to be more emotional in their outlook and more reliant on emotional information. So you want to definitely remember that. And number 3, donors are paying as much attention as you want, and this means one thing: keep it simple. How simple? He says these 2 rules will help you out. Make only one call to action at a time. If you're asking for money, don't toss in an invitation to your event or a planned giving offer. Secondly, make sure that your call to action can be expressed in 1 sentence or less. Like this, quote, "Give a needy child a book." Okay. 4th thing about your donors to remember, and this is a smart assumption, is that donors love to give. When your donors give, they are feeling empowered. They're giving because it expresses their values in action, not just words. And most donors know the truth that giving feels good. Hey, you get a quick buzz of pleasure when you give. And it improves your outlook in general and your whole situation. Charitable giving is one of the secrets to a joy-filled life. So tap into that reality. Create fundraising that assumes your donors want to give and are happy to be asked. In the very last chapter of this fabulous book, Jeff Brooks writes about things he wished he had learned earlier in his fundraising career and fundraising writing career. The first thing is, your first draft is bad. He says it's usually dreadful, and so is his, and so is every other writer. He says that's just the nature of first drafts. So throw them out if you don't like them. Start again. The next thing he says he wishes he could have learned sooner is to get rid of the first few paragraphs. He says that even after you've ripped your copy into shape, there's still part of your piece that's not up to standard usually, and it's the beginning. So he says, don't make your donors read your warm-up. It's a waste of their time and more likely to confuse them than move them to action. And thirdly, he wished he would have learned sooner is to have a swipe file and use it. A swipe file is a box of direct mail of fundraising you've saved, a huge inbox of saved fundraising emails. And he says without this swipe file, you're half the fundraiser you could be, because you need to know what's happening in the fundraising field. And you also need material. He says, let me be clear when I say use your swipe file, I mean steal it. Anytime you're stuck, blocked, or just in need of a quick start, pick something interesting from your swipe file and start adapting it to your needs. He says, don't worry about plagiarism. By the time you're finished, there's going to be nothing left of the original. And to build a great swipe file, just get on as many nonprofit lists, donate to them, and ask everyone in your family or your friends or your coworkers that are getting lots of fundraising mail, ask them to save that mail for you. And it really comes in handy, and boy do I believe that as a development officer and a fundraiser for 25 years. Those swipe files are fabulous. Well, and I only save the ones that I think are really fantastic. Anyway, you don't save the mediocre stuff. That's not worth swiping. So Jeff wishes things that he would have learned sooner is this. You can believe in magic, but don't count on it. He says that the best ideas that you are going to come up with are going to appear out of thin air, and it will seem like it's a miracle. But he says don't count on it, because actually there is no magic. And lastly, he says if you're a fundraiser, donate. And if you're not donating to other causes, you're not really a fundraiser. You don't get it. When you're a donor, you join the community. He says don't be a carpetbagger coming from the outside to exploit your part of the fundraising world. Be a donor. Understand that giving feels good, that being asked rarely hurts, and that giving makes your whole life more joyful. Hey, this is Joy Olson saying thanks for having been here today. I hope that you get a chance to add this book to your own library. But in the meantime, wishing you all kinds of great fundraising success, more information about us, because we're here to inspire you and give you lots of fundraising tips. We're at joyolsongroup.com, blockbusterfundraising.com. Hundreds, I think over 300 free fundraising video tips on our Blockbuster Fundraising YouTube channel. We're also enjoying our IGTV channel, and thank you for all of you that have made so many nice comments about it. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you having been here today. Wishing you all the very best fundraising success. Bye-bye.